Every bomb that falls on Ukraine doesn't just destroy buildings, it burns money too. Each missile costs millions of dollars, and yet after more than 2 years, the war still hasn't stopped. Because in every war, someone bleeds and someone profits. That's the harsh truth. In wars, ordinary people always lose and a few powerful ones always win. The soldiers on the front lines lose their lives, their families lose their peace. But behind them, there are people whose businesses start booming. When a war begins, weapon factories start running day and night, governments release new defense budgets, oil prices rise, and global markets react instantly. Some people lose everything, while others quietly make millions from the chaos. The US and NATO countries flooded Russia with thousands of sanctions, but what's really surprising is this: Russia's economy didn't collapse. In fact, it started adapting, finding new ways to survive and even profit. So the question is, how did that happen? Let's break down the economic side of this war. Who's paying the price and who's getting richer from it? When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, most Western experts made one confident prediction that Russia's economy would collapse within months. The logic seemed clear. Over 16,000 sanctions were imposed, the harshest in modern history. Big brands like McDonald's, Coca-Cola, Visa, and Apple left the country overnight. Russian banks were cut off from the global SWIFT system, and the ruble lost half its value within weeks. It looked like a financial knockout, but the ruble bounced back, factories kept running, and Moscow's streets looked calm. Western analysts were confused. How can an isolated country stay afloat? The answer lies in what economists now call the war economy. When a country goes to war, its entire system shifts. The regular economy, where people spend money on daily goods and services, starts transforming into a state-controlled structure. Production moves toward defense needs, imports are replaced by domestic goods, and the government begins pumping money into weapons, factories, and soldiers. In simple terms, war becomes a business. While ordinary Russians were struggling with inflation and shortages, the state was spending heavily on defense contracts, new jobs, and propaganda campaigns. Money kept circulating not because of growth, but because of war. To the outside world, Russia looked like it had survived against all odds. But inside, it was surviving because the war had turned into an economic engine. It was survival disguised as strategy, and this is where Putin's version of economic genius begins, turning a crisis into control. As the fighting dragged on, the Russian government increased its defense spending by billions of dollars. Old factories that had been shut down for years were reopened to produce tanks, bullets, and uniforms. Thousands of new workers were hired, and entire towns that once depended on small businesses now depended on defense contracts. This sudden activity made the economy look alive again. GDP numbers started to rise, employment went up, and the government proudly said that the country was stronger than ever. War spending creates what economists call artificial growth. On paper, it looks like progress. But in reality, the country is producing things that destroy value instead of creating it. A missile is expensive to make, and once fired, it's gone forever. It doesn't build schools, hospitals, or roads. It doesn't improve people's lives. Still, for a short time, it keeps factories busy, salaries flowing, and people employed. And that's how Russia managed to avoid an immediate collapse. But one must remember that every war needs money, and that money doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from the people. In Russia, the government spends billions every month to keep the war machine running. That money is taken from the same budget that could have gone to hospitals, schools, and public welfare. Prices of basic goods have risen, unemployment has hit smaller towns, and ordinary families are the ones paying the hidden cost of war. The same story plays out in Ukraine too. Ukraine's economy has shrunk sharply since the invasion. Millions have lost jobs, businesses have shut down, and the country now runs mostly on foreign aid. That aid sounds generous, but most of it comes in the form of loans, and those loans will have to be repaid by future generations. So while governments talk about defending borders and protecting sovereignty, the real fight for survival happens in homes, in kitchen budgets, in empty wallets, and in the loss of security that families once had. Wars may begin with political goals, but they continue through economic sacrifices made by common people. The soldier pays with his life, the taxpayer pays with his earnings, and while both bleed, a few powerful hands collect the profits in silence. But if wars destroy economies, then why do they keep happening? The answer is simple: because for some people, war is business. And Russia is not alone in this sin. In the United States, companies like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and Northrop Grumman have made record profits since the Russia-Ukraine conflict began. Their stock prices have climbed, their production lines are full, and their government contracts keep expanding. Europe has followed the same path. Countries like Germany, France, and Poland, which once reduced defense spending, are now rebuilding their armies. They are buying tanks, fighter jets, and air defense systems at massive costs. The fear of war has become a business opportunity. So, while governments frame war as a matter of national pride, behind the scenes it runs like a global supply chain with weapons, oil, and money constantly changing hands. And when the West thought Russia would collapse under their sanctions, Russia found a whole new path of the economy. Countries like India, China, and Turkey started buying Russian crude oil at heavy discounts. On paper, it looked like Russia was losing money by selling cheaper. But globally, oil prices had gone up because of the war. So even with discounts, Russia was earning more than before. It was a clever move. While Europe struggled with an energy crisis and rising fuel prices, Russia quietly redirected its oil toward Asia and kept its cash flow alive. Soon a secret network started forming that was a shadow fleet of ships that carried Russian oil around the world without showing their true destinations. Some vessels changed flags mid-sea, some turned off tracking systems, and some sold oil to middlemen who resold it as non-Russian crude. Payments were no longer in dollars. Many were made in Chinese yuan, Indian rupees, or UAE dirhams. Some even involved gold. Russia had found a way to bypass the global financial system almost entirely. The result was shocking. By late 2023, oil and gas revenue was again filling the Russian budget. The sanctions that were supposed to suffocate the economy had only made it more self-reliant and creative. For Russia, oil became the silent weapon not used on the battlefield but in the markets. While the world focused on missiles and tanks, Moscow fought its own invisible economic war through barrels of oil. This new oil network didn't just keep Russia alive, it gave rise to a whole new global trade system that quietly ignored Western restrictions. And it was only one part of Putin's larger plan to show that even without the dollar, a nation could still survive. That plan became even clearer when the ruble made its comeback. When the war began, the Russian ruble crashed overnight. Its value dropped sharply and people rushed to withdraw their savings. Western leaders mocked it, calling the ruble rubble. But within months, the situation completely reversed. By mid-2022, the ruble became one of the strongest currencies in the world. Putin's strategy was simple but bold as he announced that countries buying Russian oil or gas had to pay in rubles. European nations, desperate for energy, had no choice but to comply. This created sudden demand for the currency and its value bounced back. The Russian central bank raised interest rates, restricted foreign currency outflow, and used gold reserves to stabilize the market. After being banned from the SWIFT payment system, it switched to a local network called SPSS and linked it with China's CIPS to keep trade moving. These systems became the backbone of a new financial route that didn't rely on the dollar. Trade with China, India, and several Asian and African countries began happening in local currencies. Oil was paid for in yuan, machinery in dirhams, and the idea of trading without the dollar began to spread. Sanctions pushed countries to question America's control over global finance. Various nations started discussing a shared currency, and many countries increased their gold reserves. In trying to isolate Russia, the West unintentionally accelerated a new economic order, one where power is no longer centered in one place. But the question is, if Russia has already stabilized its economy, built new trade partnerships, and recovered its currency, why doesn't it stop the war? The answer is simple, but uncomfortable. The war has become its economy. A huge part of Russia's industries, jobs, and political control now depends on the conflict. If the war stopped, factories would lose orders, unemployment would rise, and the illusion of stability would collapse. War spending also gives the government power. It controls which industries get money, who wins contracts, and which news stories reach the public. It keeps people distracted from inflation and inequality. So for the Kremlin, peace is more dangerous than war. It might look stable for now, but an economy built on destruction cannot last forever. The real cost is being paid quietly by ordinary people. In Russia, prices of food and essentials have doubled, medicines are scarce, and small businesses are closing. Young men live in fear of being drafted while families are torn apart. In Ukraine, cities lie in ruins, millions are displaced, and the economy has collapsed. Children are growing up knowing only war. For both nations, the real damage isn't just economic but human. Lost lives, broken families, and fading futures. Economists call it militarized stability, but it's an illusion. The real price of war is never paid in money. It's paid in lives. People often call Russia's survival an act of economic genius, and maybe even in a technical sense it is. But when you look closely, it isn't genius. It's tragedy measured in numbers. What's the value of growth that depends on war? What kind of success comes from thousands of deaths? True genius isn't earning through conflict. It's finding a way to grow without one. Thanks for watching, folks. I shall see you in the next one.